She said, "You're just overreacting like always." And for a moment, I believed her. But then things stopped adding up. The late night calls she took in another room, the way she twisted every argument until I was apologizing, I knew something wasn't right. That's when I decided to hit record. What I captured on that phone ended everything she'd built. My pulse thundered. I knew this recording was my only shot at the truth. Looking back, it didn't start with the big betrayals. It was the small, almost invisible things that crept in and took hold, until I couldn't tell what was real anymore. Doubt crept in until it colored everything I did. It started with moments that left me off balance. A plan I was certain we'd made, suddenly denied. One evening, I brought up meeting friends. Sure, we'd already agreed, but she met me with a blank stare. "We never agreed to that," she said, her voice steady enough to make me hesitate. I felt a flush of embarrassment, suddenly unsure of my own memory. "You really need to start paying attention," she sighed, and I found myself shrinking, apologizing for something I couldn't even prove had happened. I tried to brush it off as stress. Maybe I was just distracted, working too much and not sleeping enough. But these moments stacked up. My car keys vanished, only to reappear hours later in plain sight after I'd searched everywhere. She'd laugh, tossing them onto the table. "You're so scatterbrained." It all seemed harmless at first, but the pattern kept repeating. Arguments would start over nothing, and I'd try to explain myself, but before long the conversation twisted. "That's not what I meant," I'd say, but she'd cut in. "No, that's exactly what you said." Eventually, I'd apologize just to end it, even though I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Gaslighting is when someone denies your memory or feelings so consistently that you start doubting yourself. It isn't always obvious or dramatic. Sometimes it's a quiet, steady drip. You're imagining things, or you're too sensitive. After a while, I started to believe it. I began second-guessing everything I did or said, convinced I was the problem. I stopped talking about it with friends, afraid of sounding paranoid or dramatic. The isolation made it worse. Without anyone else to check my reality, her version of events took over. One night, after a long day, I postponed dinner with her family. I just needed some space. Instead, it turned into a fight where she accused me of not caring about her or the people she loved. She started crying, telling me how hard it was to be with someone so selfish. By the end, I was apologizing, feeling like I'd failed her again. Afterward, I sat there, the shame and confusion pressing down on me. It seemed easier to give in than to try to untangle what had actually happened. The anxiety grew. I felt it in my chest every morning, a constant worry that I'd say or do the wrong thing. I pulled back from people, kept quiet about what was going on, convinced that I was the one at fault. Looking back, the loneliness was crushing. The less I shared, the more her story became the only one I heard. Still, there were moments, brief flashes, where I wondered if I really was as terrible as she said. The questions lingered, but every time I tried to hold on to them, she'd shut me down with another accusation or a dismissive laugh. It wore me down, but I couldn't let go of the nagging sense that something wasn't right. That's when I realized I needed proof. If I couldn't trust my own memory, maybe I could trust what I could record. I needed something solid, something that couldn't be twisted or denied. The idea felt desperate, but it was the only way I could see to get my bearings again. I knew it wouldn't be simple, but I was ready to try. Recording my life felt strange at first, but the alternative, losing my grip on reality, was worse. I'd already noticed the cracks spreading into other parts of my life. I was forgetting deadlines, missing texts from friends, zoning out during meetings. It was like her voice followed me everywhere, making me question not just our relationship, but my own judgment at work and with people I cared about. That fear pushed me to act. The first time I hit record, my hands shook. I set my phone down, screen dark, and tried to act normal. I wondered if I was just being paranoid, if maybe she was right about me all along. but I couldn't let it go. I needed something solid, something that would either confirm my doubts or put them to rest. At the start, I didn't have a plan. I would record our conversations whenever I could, whether we were in the kitchen or the bedroom, just letting the phone run in the background. Sometimes it felt pointless, like I was chasing shadows. There were days I'd listen back, hear nothing out of the ordinary, and almost convince myself I'd made it all up. Other times I'd catch a sharp comment or a twist in her tone that made me pause. I deleted a few recordings out of embarrassment, worried I was crossing some line, but I kept going. It wore me down. She was careful, never outright cruel, always framing things as jokes or misunderstandings. "You're really bad at remembering things, huh?" she'd say, laughing, but her eyes would linger on me a little too long. Or after an argument, she'd sigh, "It's just impossible to have a rational conversation with you." These weren't dramatic moments. They were quiet, easy to brush off if you weren't looking for them. But when I listened to them outside the heat of the moment, I heard the edge in her voice, the way she steered things, so I always ended up apologizing. Listening to those recordings was harder than I expected. I'd sit alone, headphones on, replaying her words and my own responses. It was draining. Sometimes I had to stop and walk around the apartment just to clear my head. I started to dread it, but I couldn't stop. I needed to know if I was losing my mind or if there was something real behind my doubts. Then one night, I caught it. We were arguing about a conversation she swore we'd had. She insisted I'd agreed to something important, even quoted my supposed words back to me. I stopped the playback, heart in my throat. The lies weren't just in my mind. They were in her voice. The recording from that day was clear. We'd never talked about it. She was making it up, and I finally had proof. Seeing my own sanity in those files changed everything. I started piecing together the patterns, how she'd downplay things, flip blame, twist my words until I couldn't see straight. It wasn't just about catching her anymore. The recordings gave me back my sense of reality. They reminded me I wasn't crazy or forgetful or broken. I could trust what I'd heard, what I'd lived. I stopped being afraid to record. The more evidence I gathered, the stronger I felt. It wasn't just my word against hers anymore. I had the truth, plain and simple. The clarity brought a new kind of strength. I knew what I had to do next, and for the first time in a long while, I felt ready to face whatever came. Facing her on the couch, I felt the shift in the room before either of us spoke. My pulse quickened, but her eyes flickered just enough to show she sensed something different this time. She looked up from her phone, casual at first, but I could see the calculation behind her expression. I sat down across from her, steady and direct. "We need to talk," I said, and the words landed harder than usual. She didn't have the upper hand anymore. She tried to brush it off with a sigh, arms crossed. "What now?" Her tone was sharp, but I ignored it. Instead of explaining, I pulled out my phone and found the recording that mattered most. The one where she insisted I'd agreed to something I never had. I hit play. Her voice filled the room, confident, spinning a story that didn't exist. The absence of any agreement was obvious. I watched her as she listened, trying to read her face. At first, she barely reacted, but then her jaw tightened and her eyes darted away. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, reaching for my phone, but I pulled it back. "Just listen," I said, not raising my voice. She shifted in her seat, frustration building. The recording ended, and for a second, there was only the hum of the air conditioner. She tried to recover with a dismissive laugh. "You're taking everything out of context. You're obsessed. Do you even hear how paranoid you sound, recording me?" I kept my voice even. It's not paranoia if it's true. For the first time, she didn't have a comeback. Her hands fidgeted in her lap, and she glanced toward the door. The silence between us stretched out, heavy and awkward. I could see her searching for a way to regain control, but the evidence was right there. She couldn't twist it, couldn't talk her way out of it. Her anger faded into dismissal. "Fine," she muttered, waving me off. Believe whatever you want. It doesn't matter. But she wouldn't meet my eyes, and she didn't look at the phone again. In that moment, I realized I'd already won. My truth was louder than her silence. Afterward, I sat alone in my room, replaying what had just happened. The weight I'd carried for so long started to lift. I thought about how isolated I'd felt, how I'd doubted myself even when the signs were right in front of me. That night, I sent a short audio clip to my closest friend. She listened and called me back almost immediately. "You're not crazy," she said. "That's exactly what you described. I'm glad you trusted yourself enough to do this." Hearing her say it out loud made everything real in a way I hadn't expected. I realized how important it was to share the truth with someone who believed me. I didn't tell everyone right away, but I started letting a few people in, people who mattered, people who'd only ever seen her best side. Their reactions weren't dramatic, but they were validating. I saw the shift in their faces as they listened, the slow realization that the person they thought they knew wasn't the whole story. The fallout wasn't explosive. She didn't beg or rage or try to win me back. Instead, she withdrew, her control slipping away the more I spoke up. I stopped feeling small. I stopped apologizing for things I hadn't done. The recordings didn't just prove what had happened. They broke the hold she'd had on my reality. It was only after everything settled that I understood how much power there is in shining a light on the truth. The lies only worked when they stayed hidden. Now, with the evidence out in the open and people finally seeing what I'd lived through, the story was no longer just mine to carry. Manipulation thrives in the shadows. Once you shine a light on it, its power begins to fade. Through all of this, I learned to trust my instincts. If something feels wrong, don't ignore it. Watch for patterns, and if you can, document what's happening. Proof can help you reclaim your sense of reality and confront the person responsible. You don't have to do it alone. Reach out to people you trust or seek professional support. Have you ever felt gaslit? Share your story in the comments below. If you found this helpful, hit subscribe so you don't miss stories that empower you. Sometimes the only way to silence the doubt is to let the truth speak for itself.